Hi, this is Caroline from The Happy Sensitive. I'm a coach for highly sensitive people and empaths. And today I want to chat with you about, are you an intense learner? An intense learner, what is that? Somebody who really, you're kind of like, when you learn something, you're really into it and you absorb it all. You get kind of obsessed with the topic. You're thinking about it a lot. You're reading about it a lot. You're just kind of sponging up all this information and you're just like seeing opportunities to learn more left and right? If that sounds like you, I would say you're an intense learner. Now, being an intense learner has some benefits, but it also has some downsides. And it's just really helpful to know if you're an intense learner, because then you can start to see your own cycles in this, okay? So the benefits are that if you're an intense learner, you learn very quickly. Things that maybe take other people 10 years to learn, you learn them in 3 years. This is great, right? But the downside is if you don't realize that you're an intense learner, you might actually feel like a failure, feel like you're behind, feel like you struggle more than other people do with learning this thing. But it's not because you're less intelligent or less capable, it's because you are doing it 3 or 4 times as intensely as everyone else. So you get burned out more quickly, you get overwhelmed more quickly. You need to realize that this is your method and it's okay to do that, but it has some downsides. So the downside is that, yeah, you overwhelm yourself, right? And that's okay, but you got to realize and then take a break and realize, oh, wait, I'm an intense learner. I just found this new thing I'm interested in. I'm learning all about it and I'm probably overwhelming myself. So that means when you start to feel discouraged and like you will never learn this thing, it's just too much, you got to just take a break and realize, oh, I need a processing break. I need some time to just let everything sink in. And I just need to let myself feel overwhelmed with all this learning. That's okay. I've learned a lot. It's okay to be overwhelmed, but just not add any more for a little while until I start to kind of find my footing again. That's really important when you're an intense learner, because you will overdo it, and the overdoing it is part of being an intense learner. It's part of how you learn so quickly, and it's okay as long as you take breaks. Okay, so you have these cycles of intense learning, you're like, wow, and it's really cool, and it's really exciting, and it's really fun, and then it gets a little bit much, and then you start to feel like crying, and you're panicking a little bit. You know, this is when it becomes less fun. This is where you gotta take a break and say, I'm gonna put this project aside for a week or so, just not think about it, and just kind of coast. And then you'll start to find like, oh, you're interested again, and you start learning about it again, you start reading about it again, you start practicing things again, and you get excited again, and it's all good and it's all great, and you're applying all this new knowledge and it's really exciting, and then at some point it starts to get a little bit overwhelming and you start to panic again and take a break. Right? So the intense learning pattern is you welcome the intensity, but then you also take a break. And you realize when you feel discouraged, you feel like a loser, you feel like you'll never be able to do this, it's just because you've done so much in a short amount of time. You need a break. You need a break. That's it. It's okay. It's not a big deal. And then if you take a break, you'll feel better. If you've gone through this like cycle consciously a few times, you'll start to notice it becomes less scary and less overwhelming, just because like, oh, I'm getting overwhelmed now, so I just got to take a break, and that's just part of my learning process. It's okay. Now, if you're in a school situation or you're taking some kind of course with other people, what you're going to notice is that, if you talk to other people about their learning experience, is that your first year is going to be so intense and exhausting. It's so much, and you feel like, wow, that was just like Mount Everest, okay? And then you talk to other people that are like, oh no, the first year was okay. It wasn't a big deal. It's not so hard. But there's a reason for this. It's because when you're learning, you go deep. You're thorough, right? So when you're learning about a topic, you don't just want to just learn the little piece that is being presented to you. You want to know why. You want to know about alternatives. You want to know how it works. So you really do your extra research on your own without even realizing per se, but you just have questions. You're like, okay, that's cool, but what about this? And what about that? And how does that work? And how does that work? Right? And so those other people in the course are not doing that. So they're just doing what they're told to do, and it's not too much, it's doable, but you're doing like 5 steps on top of that, right? And so that first year is going to be exhausting for you, but you will have laid really, really strong foundations. So if you worry, this is one of the pitfalls, if you worry that every year is going to be like this, you're probably going to give up. But if you're an intense learner, that first year, or maybe it's half a year, or maybe it's first 3 months, if it's really intense, it's not going to stay like that. It's just because when you're diving into a new subject matter and you go really deep, right? And that's intense learning, and that's a lot, and it takes a lot to process. But then once you've done it, you've done it. So that means when you stick around and then the second year or the second period, you talk to other people how they're doing. Other people, you're going to notice, are going to struggle because now those questions they've been avoiding asking are starting to come on their plate. They're going to have to ask deeper questions to keep on learning. You already asked those questions 6 months ago, right? You already did that part of the learning. So now the second year is going to be way easier. You're like, oh, already figured that out, already questioned that, already thought about that, already, chip. So it's important to know, because if you give up in that first year because you think you're not capable, because you think it's too hard, but you're an intense learner, it's going to get easier. It's going to get easier for you. And it's also, it's take a break in that first learning period, that first year, that first 6 months, whatever the trajectory is. When it gets too intense, take a little break, but know that you're laying the foundations for your further learning, and it's only going to get easier from here, right? And so then very quickly, there's going to be a point where you start to realize, oh, at the beginning of my learning about this, I thought this is such a huge topic, I would never become an expert. But then a few years down the line, you're already starting to teach others because you've looked into this deeply. And you start to notice people have questions and you're like, oh, I know the answer. Oh, I looked into that. I already tried that out, right? Because you've gone really deep. So yeah, the intensity and the speed, they go together. Going faster, going deeper, going fast and deep is intense, period. But it means that you learn very, very quickly. Now, another benefit of being an intense learner is something I wanted to mention in the beginning and I kind of forgot. But it's really important, because the only way you can be an intense learner is if you're curious and you don't mind not knowing. And you might think, oh, but I hate it when I don't know because I want to know. Yeah, no, that's kind of what I mean, but kind of not. So your willingness to find out is built on acknowledging that you don't know, right? You're like, I don't know this. I want to know. I want to find out. Great. But you can only go and find out something if you first acknowledge to yourself that you don't know something. And there are people who they just want to pretend to be an expert. They want to pretend to know even when they don't know. And that's not you. You're going to be real about this. You're like, no, I really don't know this and I really want to find out. And you're going to do the work to find it out, right? So that means you have this learning mindset. You're curious. You're not afraid to not know, but you are very anxious to go and find the answer. You're very willing to go find the answer. But you're okay with starting over as a beginner. Yeah, when I say you're okay with it, you might say, no, I hate it and it sucks. But you're doing it. That's the thing. You're willing to go there. And a lot of people are not. A lot of people are like, no, I've gathered my expertise in this area and this makes me have a certain status in society. And I'm not going to go over and start at the bottom somewhere else. No. But when you're an intense learner, chances are you kind of like diving into a new topic and starting way from the bottom, saying, I know absolutely nothing about this. Yay. Yummy. I get to find out all this cool stuff about this whole new field. That's so exciting. And in the beginning, you're going to be super excited, right? Then you're going to hit that overwhelm wave where you sponged up so much information that you're just kind of like, whoa. And you got to take a break. Last tip I have on that is if you are a voracious reader, but you're learning about something that is in fact also practical, is really make an effort to apply what you're learning, because that's just a much more grounded and calm way to learn, right? So like me, for example, I'm learning a lot about gardening now. I have a vegetable garden and I'm just learning all that I can. And what I really consciously do is when I learn a new tip from a YouTube video or an article, I go and do it that same week, right? So if somebody says, hey, you could actually add that to your plants and it makes them grow better and you just need these few kitchen materials, I go and gather it up, I get it ready, I go do it right away so I can test it out so that I've actually done it, because then the information's in my system. Then it's processed through. I've actually read about it or heard about it, I've done it, I've seen the results. And so it's so much easier to remember, and it's also so much easier just to let go of the things that maybe are true in some cases, but they don't work for me, or it's not so useful in practice, and just move on, right? One of the pitfalls is stuffing your brain with just pure information that hasn't been verified by you in practice. Because then you're just kind of sponging and holding on to everything just in case it might be useful, and then this space gets cluttered very quickly. So you want to make space here as quickly as possible. Learning a new thing, applying it right away so that your body has also learned how to do it, really makes a difference. Learning up here is kind of exhausting, but like full body learning, like you've taken the information, you've gathered the materials you need, you've taken the physical, practical steps to apply it. It just, it's so much easier to actually, so you create space in your mind by actually taking the actual steps to do something in practice. So as much as possible, I know some things are just going to be kind of theoretical frameworks that you can't apply, but as much as possible, try to apply what you're learning, try to use the frameworks that you're learning, try to really see how they play out in reality, because it's going to make it easier to retain the information, and it's not going to feel so overwhelming up here. Now, if you've been watching my channel and you're highly sensitive and you really relate to this intense learning, it's interesting to check if you might be a highly sensitive sensation seeker. Because if you're a sensation seeker, it means that you have two sides to you. You have the sensitive side that just wants everything calm and quiet and that needs a lot of downtime to process, but you also have that part of you that's like seeking new adventures and seeking new experiences and that loves learning, and that just really, you're constantly kind of like rearranging your life in a way. Like maybe you have everything set up, you're like, now I know this and this is clear. Oh, but I'm gonna dive into this new part of life, this whole new area. I'm gonna do all these new things. And so you're kind of upsetting the sensitive side of you who's like, oh, we just had our stability and routines and now everything's new again. So you have this somewhat of an inner conflict between the part of you that craves new adventures and new learning and new experiences, and the part of you that gets overwhelmed. And so then that I was talking about in the video, where you learn, you get excited, you're like, this is really cool, and then the overwhelm hits. The moment the overwhelm hits is when let's say your sensitive side really comes to the fore and is like, I just want to stay home, I don't want to talk to anybody, I just need some time to myself. And it can be very confusing because you were so excited before about learning all these new things, right? But it's because if you have these two sides of you, it actually makes sense. Like you're like two people in one, okay? And you have to get along with both. And I am like this, so this is something that was very kind of mystifying for me because I don't really relate to many of the kind of introvert, highly sensitive folks out there who are just like, seem to be like very content with like constantly hiding away from the world and doing as low-key stuff as possible. I'm not like that at all. I'm like, I'm bored, I want to try something new, I want to learn something new, but then I've had to learn, like, what does that mean for that sensitive side that gets overwhelmed, and how do I manage that? And so I've actually developed a whole system around that came out of my own burnout, of all things, because at some point I completely burned out, and as you might imagine, being burned out is very boring. And I know some people use burnout very loosely, like, oh, I'm so burned out, and they're still working like 40-hour weeks. No. When I say burned out, I mean, I was barely doing anything. I could not work. It took me 2 hours just to get showered and dressed. Everything was so slow because everything inside of me was overloaded. And as you might imagine, it's very, very boring. It's very boring when you can barely do anything, So I had to somehow build up my energy again from this place of being completely almost like flatlined. And so I wasn't able to do much and still had to find a way to keep my, sensation seeking side entertained, but not overwhelm my sensitive side. And so for me, it got really, really extreme like that. I hope it's not that extreme for you, because it really, really sucked. But it got that extreme for me, and then I was really forced to just get to know these two sides of myself and get to figure out a system, like how do I build my energy back up and really set up my life in a way where both sides of me are working well and are happy, so that I don't burn out again, obviously, because you know, I one of the reasons I burned out is because I kind of shoved my sensitive side away, and I really amped up my sensation seeking side, and I just burned my sensitive side out, really, when I look back at it. And there was more going on than that, but that was, you know, in the context of this video, that's what was happening. And well, it took me many years, but eventually I figured out kind of a system, a way to look at my sensitivity and my sensation seeking side and stimulation and my nervous system, to really put it all together in a framework where I could actually organize and predict, like, what do I need to do? How do I need to do it so that I feel good, I'm enjoying myself, and it's not too much, and that I could also predict what would work for me and what would not work for me. So if I was invited somewhere, or if I wanted to go do something, I would know, oh, this is going to be too much, or this is going to be okay, or it's going to be a lot, but here's how I can balance it out in advance and afterwards to actually make it work. So this is, you know, this system has become part of my life now. It's how I do everything, where I really think in terms of really kind of balancing my nervous system. So those two sides of me are doing well. And this just become very second nature, but in the beginning it's something I had to very consciously learn. If that sounds cool to you, if you're like, oh, that's really interesting, this is something I teach in my Happy Sensitive Foundations program. Because my experience is, you know, if you're if you're super introverted and you just want to get away from everything, you're not going to have as much of a problem with like balancing activity, because your go-to is going to be just less, right? But if you're someone who is on the one hand seeking adventures and seeking new experiences, but on the other hand also getting overwhelmed and overstimulated more quickly than most, then you're going to have very few role models, and you need a way to kind of set those boundaries and limits from the inside out based on what actually works for you, and not based on what other people think is normal. Because a lot of people are going to think that when you're active, you're like your normal self, and then when you're like resting, they're going to think you're depressed. But that's not the case. If you have both the sensation seeking side and the sensitive, the highly sensitive side just needs rest. It doesn't mean you're depressed, right? It just needs like a different kind of lifestyle, and you need to indulge in that from time to time. And then, you know, then there's some more people who are more introverted, and they see you being really active and learning new things, and they think that you're just like overdoing everything, that you're overactive. But this is also part of you. You can be very active at times, right? So it can be very confusing to your environment, to people around you, and as a result to you, because how are you supposed to understand what's happening if you don't have anyone around you who gets it, who's just like that, right? And so that's what it was like for me as well. I didn't really have any role models, so I had to really build this new way of doing things from the inside out. But it's something that I can teach you. And once you understand this, have this new way of relating to both sides of you, it's something that you keep with you for life, and it's something you only need to learn once. And then, you know, you're good to go. And you can, you know, keep using that system and adjusting it as you need, because of course your needs change throughout your life, right? Like this year you might really love yoga, 5 years from now you might really hate it, who knows? And it doesn't matter, because if you understand kind of the system of your high sensitivity and your sensation seeking side, then you can just kind of swap out different things that you want to do at different times, but you know how to balance it all. All right, I hope that was helpful. Thanks so much for listening. The link for Happy Sensitive Foundations is below in case you're interested. Till next time, bye.